All right, y'all, we're getting closer and closer to the new year. I want to thank all the Auburn fans out there. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast, talking Auburn football. Go ahead and like the video, comment, and subscribe. It doesn't take that much to do either or. Like the video, subscribe, get into the comment section. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger or Eagle. Ad nauseum, we've been talking about Auburn taking on Minnesota next week in the Outback Bowl in Florida. Auburn has made several appearances to the Outback Bowl. The last one actually a loss to Wisconsin in overtime. Not surprisingly, Auburn taking on another Big Ten team. That's the way this game is set up. The Big Ten against the SEC. So, a lot of moving parts to this game. Of course, we've talked about Seth Williams. We've talked about Bo Nix. We've talked about Auburn. But we haven't said a lot about Minnesota. Now, Minnesota actually, like I said before, a little bit in another video, was one of the hottest teams in college football. They were actually thought, especially after a nice home win against Penn State, a lot of folks were thinking like, you know what? Minnesota, they made that epic jump from like number 17 to the inside of the top 10 after a 31-26 win over Penn State. A lot of folks didn't think it would happen. But actually, when you look at the betting lines and you look at the people that are really close to the sport, they thought that Minnesota's speed would outlast Penn State. So it really wasn't a surprise in the folks that were kind of in the know. But either way, a huge win nonetheless has Minnesota as one of the most talked about football teams in the mid to latter part of the season. Of course, a loss to Iowa late, 10-2 for the year, losing to Wisconsin as well, has Minnesota facing a very sneaky, very talented Auburn team. This is an Auburn team that you probably, kind of like last year when Auburn played against Purdue in the Music City Bowl. I was like, man, this is when my YouTube really first got going. I was thinking to myself, this is about to be a problem. When I had a chance to glance at both teams schematically and from a talent standpoint, I really thought that, of course, Auburn outclassed Purdue, and sure enough, Auburn did. 63-14 later, Auburn thrashed and shellacked Purdue in every aspect of how a bowl team can get beat in a bowl classic game. So here we are against Minnesota. Now, do I think that Auburn outclasses Minnesota from a talent standpoint? I think so. When you look at the recruiting classes over the last few years for the Auburn Tigers, I mean, it's not even close. Auburn up there in the top 11, 10 threshold. Minnesota, however, best class was ranked number 38 in the last few years. However, these teams are very well coached. Okay, so as we look at this particular football game and we look at certain matchups, I'm really intrigued by, one, the fact that Minnesota will be without their offensive coordinator. As a matter of fact, Kirk Ciarrocca is actually going back to Pennsylvania, his home state, to coach with the Nittany Lions. He was actually up for the Broyles Award this year. He's gone. So now, of course, if you've had a long, drawn-out season, you're going to have a basic offensive philosophy. I don't think overall the offensive coordinator being gone for one game is going to totally dismantle the offensive philosophy, especially considering, the personnel is still there. They still have the same tendency, and, from a play calling standpoint, you can still, do some things. And as you look at it, Matt Simon is going to be taking over as as the interim offensive coordinator in this particular game, very familiar with the offense, passing game coordinator. So there won't be any drop off that much as far as philosophy goes. It's just a matter of game, how you strategize game planning and such. Now, when I look at this particular game, I look at the matchups between the defensive line and the offensive line. Specifically, the defensive line from Auburn and the offensive line from Minnesota. I think that Minnesota arguably has one of the largest offensive lines, that Auburn has faced. One of them. Georgia's got a big one. Alabama, they're pretty big too. Oregon, of course, a big offensive line. So I think we got a situation where this thing is going to be decided in the trenches once again. Bad news for Minnesota is the fact that Derrick Brown, Marlon Davidson, the whole crew is going to be there for this particular game. This game actually means something for Auburn. This is like a historical thing. Only 15 times has Auburn won 10 plus games in a season. And that's pretty significant considering the history of Auburn football. So we look at these matchups, we look at the size of Minnesota's offensive line, and then, like I said before, these guys are huge, but they're very young though. And I'm just not too sure from a physicality standpoint if Minnesota can withstand the speed, physicality of what Auburn presents at the line of scrimmage for an entire football game, to where they won't wear out, to where they won't start to make mistakes. Don't get me wrong, this offense has been very, very productive. 2,000-yard receivers, 1,000-yard back. But I'm just not too sure how that's going to translate over to a high-quality, high-diverse defense that Auburn has. The prediction show is coming up real soon, but I just don't think, as far as the line of scrimmage, that when you look at the Minnesota offensive line, Auburn defensive line, not a chance. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast, talking Auburn football. Go ahead and like the video, comment, and subscribe. As always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger or Eagle.